This is Going Inside, Healing Trauma from the Inside Out. Hosted by me, licensed trauma therapist John Clark, Going Inside is a weekly podcast on a mission to help you heal from trauma and connect with your authentic self. Tune in for enlightening guest interviews, immersive solo deep dives, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Follow me on socials at John Clark Therapy on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. Seth Kopald is a certified internal family systems practitioner. He holds a PhD in organization management with a specialization in leadership and a master's in education. Seth has been an IFS practitioner since 2012, and he is an experienced program assistant for IFS levels 1, 2, and 3 trainings. He also has been on Richard Schwartz's staff for IFS retreats. You can learn more about Seth's book by going to sethkopald.com/self-led and find him on Instagram at self-led by Seth. We'll put links to all that in the description. Seth, thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You got it. I've cheated a little bit and heard your story about how you came to IFS and your interviews with Tammy. So I've done a little of my homework, but for folks that are maybe just now hearing from you, maybe you can fill us in a little bit more about who you are and how you got here. And then today we're going to be talking about your book, Self Energy, and we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah. My course to getting to IFS would probably be different than many folks. So I started prior to IFS, I was really into early childhood education. I was a Montessori teacher. I was working for migrant seasonal Head Start programs nationally, which is a program that serves migrant farm worker families. And I was put in charge of not just helping them with education, but with their programs and even their management. So I went back to school and got a PhD in organization management with a specialization in leadership. During my PhD program, I ended up going through a divorce, and I went to go see a therapist because I was starting to get some anxiety, I would say, regarding like what's going to happen with the kids and what will happen with my relationship with them, and just even the thought of even being with them even half time was really hard for my system. And the therapist I was seeing introduced me to IFS through a book, Dick Schwartz, Introduction to IFS. And I write about this in the book, Self-Led, that, just by reading about parts, I noticed pretty quickly how I was able to integrate it and notice that my anxiety was a part. And I noticed I got space instantly from that part. And I didn't even realize I was unblending, but just by noticing that this idea that this could be a part of me instead of all of me really helped. And then magically, I thought to myself, I wonder if this IFS stuff has a conference I could go to or learn about it more. I looked it up, and this was probably a month before the annual conference. And so that was when I was back in Chicago. And I signed up, got accepted. A week or two later, I show up at the conference. And I feel like IFS, like now I see, like my guides must have been with me all along. I mean, I know they were. I didn't really recognize them at the time. But I felt like it was like this big opening, like a yes, because even when I showed up at the airport, I hired a shuttle, so a van was supposed to pick me up, and all of a sudden I get a text from the van driver saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I also run a limo service. I wasn't able to drop off the limo. Is it okay if I pick you up?" The limo, and I'm not like needing a limo. Like I'm not like I don't really need that,
Yeah.
but big white stretch limo shows up. I get inside, and there's like Led Zeppelin playing, which for me was like meaningful. And it's like, wow, this is great. And even up to that point, I used to think like someone once told me if you ever go to a crosswalk and it tells you to stop, it means you're supposed to stop and like contemplate what's happening with you. And if it says go, it means like you're in the flow and you're in the right place. So for me, that was like a message like, this seems like all signs pointing to yes. And I had some beautiful experiences there, even with Dick Schwartz, which maybe I'll not go into the full story.
Yeah.
But shortly thereafter, I switched therapists because I was realizing my therapist was very new at IFS and I wanted to be with somebody more experienced. And then that person encouraged me to take the training. So back in 2011, I started and graduated in 2012, was trained by Dick and Paul Ginter, um, and just kind of used it in the workforce and used it with schools. And after being ahead of a school for a while and realizing that wasn't the course for me, I got remarried, and my wife was like, "Why don't you try one of your ideas?" And I started opening up shop to be a practitioner, and got involved with trainings and program assisting, and I found there was a sweet merge between my early childhood background as a Montessorian about really understanding the nature of children and the deep respect that Montessori has for just observing and being
Yeah.
with and really attuning to and following their needs, which I think we need to do with our parts. And then my research and organization management was really geared around creating a safe place for people to have voice in organizations so they can speak
Yeah.
up. And how do you create safety, like a climate of psychological safety? So I kind of do that with my parts and with my clients' parts. So it just all seemed to fit perfectly around creating a safe place for voice and to deeply understand children. And that so many of our parts are young that I feel like there's a gift somehow that I've achieved around really attuning to young children and sensing their needs and sensing what
Yeah.
they need from me or from my client. So it really
Yeah.
opened up things for me to be in IFS.
Yeah, I love it. There's a couple pieces that are standing out to me so far, and more on a personal level. One is this piece around child development. I have a 4-year-old, and
Mhm.
I'm constantly thinking about child development. I'm living it right with her,
Yes.
and with her school community, her teacher,
Uh-huh.
things like that, and also the kind of leadership piece or the organizational piece. My
Mhm.
my wife is coming out of a career in tech and learning and development, helping big companies figure out like how do we lead, how do we develop leaders and
Right.
managers, and this whole piece. So a lot of overlap there, and
Right.
she has been learning about IFS and just like completely falling in
Mm.
love with it and wanting to
Mhm.
implement it in all these different parts of her
What a
work.
great.
So
Yeah, I think
just
IFS is
so
such a
many,
wonderful
yeah,
thing for leaders.
yeah. A couple things from that were standing out to me in my life right now. One is having a 4-year-old daughter and constantly thinking about her development. Y you know, her school, for instance, the founder of the school, it's a forest school, so these kids, I'm in San Francisco, they spend literally all day outside in the woods, um,
Mm.
and there's really no structure to the program. The structure is all about what the teacher says is self-esteem, really helping these children develop a sense of who they are and trying things out, and, for some parents, that would be tremendously anxiety provoking, that there's no structure, there's no curriculum, right? There's no rules of like what they kind of can't do. Um, but the sense that um, children learning to trust themselves from a very early age is, in a way, kind of a radical idea because, in my experience, so much of education is about compliance, or I should say, a lot of my education, even as early as preschool, was about compliance.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes. And when you say, like, learning to trust yourself, isn't that what IFS is all about?
exactly.
And so a program like that, or like I know Montessori does that, Waldorf does that, and others, they're really saying you have this gift already, and we're just trying to not mess it up,
Yeah.
basically, right? So when we
Right.
allow the, if we think of IFS, the whole reason we have burdens is because the natural qualities of children are pushed away.
Yeah.
And when we have schools like that, and when we let the natural qualities grow and flourish, then when it's time to focus on a particular study later in life, the children have their full capacity to engage in these things.
Yeah.
When we exile all those qualities and say you all have to be the same, and you have to be this kind of way socially, and you have to be this type of way intellectually, then we start seeing kids drop off. Like, only the ones that succeed are ones that thrive in testing and language and math and things like that, where there's all these other intelligences that could be tapped into.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that our the most powerful mode, I would say, even of our brain, is when our self is allowed to flourish, because then we're not acting from protective mechanisms in the brain. We're actually in a state of open creativity and innovation.
Yeah. Seeing just kind of again, I'm just thinking about my daughter here. Um, her natural qualities that again are lots of self energy. Um, she's very connected to the things happening around her and the people. She's very connected to nature. We were on a walk yesterday, and she was the only one who stopped to literally smell the roses and found flowers that
Mm,
were beautiful and said, "Look how beautiful these are." And I wouldn't have noticed.
that's right.
She's also very quick to forgive, which I find incredible. And
Mm,
then I turn back to myself and go, I have all these hangups about forgiving, and maybe I should hold a grudge.
mm,
Should I forgive? And if I forgive, is someone going to take advantage of me if I forgive? Right. And
mm.
it's just like forgiveness to her comes so naturally. And when she offers it, you can tell it's with an open hand as much as a 4-year-old could. So
Wow,
anyway, yeah, none of this is a
that's
surprise
so
to you.
wonderful. Well, it's wonderful, and it really shows too, going back to, like, how we gain burdens in our protective system is based on how we're treated. And so, of course, your
Yeah.
parts, for whatever reason, and from your experiences, learned this is what's safe and this is what's not safe. And it sounds like
Yeah.
you're continuing to provide a space for her, that her system feels safe to forgive.
Yeah.
Where, like, for you and even for me, there's certain people I haven't fully forgiven yet that have hurt me. That, because for my parts, like, if we forgive them, does that mean they're going to enter my life again? Are they going to hurt me again?
Yep.
So I totally get it, and
Totally.
yeah, and it's often like, as artists, we wish we could have the freedom as a child, and I think with living, right, if we could have that passion, the pureness, and
Yeah.
what your daughter is showing you, that, I mean, that's like what we're all striving to go back to. That's
We
for
were,
sure.
I promise I'm not going to make this interview all about me, but I'm just really
It's
wanting to get
working
your
out fine so far.
I want to get your perspectives on these things because
Yeah.
your background with IFS and also from this child development piece is really interesting to me, and also a piece that a lot
Mhm.
of therapists don't have. A lot of therapists go straight to working with adults, and that's it,
Right,
right?
right,
Um,
sure.
I've always loved working with kids. I used to work in the schools. And have found just that connection natural. But last night we were in the garage, and I played drums. So I was playing drums, and I have been working really with my parts around creativity and being able to let go and play drums without a critical part of mine taking over and
Mhm,
going, "You suck. That's terrible. You're not as good as this guy.
mhm,
You should probably just stop playing drums." And then my daughter is sitting there on the floor behind me, and I give her a huge blank piece of paper, and she just starts creating, and it's just she's in total state of flow, and she's
mhm,
mixing colors, and she's breaking rules, right? And she's
mhm.
doing things I've never seen her do, and she thinks it's beautiful. She tells me, "Look how beautiful this is." And
Yeah,
I'm over here, right, just playing a few playing half a song on drums, getting
right.
completely worked up. So
Yeah,
here we are.
exactly. I'm a
Yeah.
drummer as well, so I totally
Oh,
relate.
no way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's a great example of how she has her natural qualities still, and it just
Yeah.
shows that whatever parenting you're doing, it's not just from her school, it must be helping her, because I think children learn pretty quickly that it's not safe to let their light shine in certain environments. So congratulations to whatever you're doing
I
at
think
home
that's
with
right.
you and your wife.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think to me that is kind of the beginning of the end, right? That piece around shutting down their light,
Mhm.
which is to me what a lot of the education system, the public education system that I went through, what did to me around compliance,
Right.
not being able to sit still, not being able
Right.
to memorize things and then remember them on
Mhm.
Friday for the test. So,
Right.
yeah,
Right. And I just want to add a little IFS theory here that, as we've been taught in IFS, that our protectors, they learn from the people around us that it's not safe to shine the light. So they exile the parts of us that are shining. And then when we grow up, those protectors will do the same. They'll turn towards others. And if they see people shining that light, they think that's not safe. And it might not be something conscious in our mind. It's just like we just feel the urge to shut it down. And you'll see that in teachers, you'll see that in parents, you'll see that in everywhere else in the workplace. So it's just really interesting to notice that it's almost like a piece of legacy that gets transferred down. Like it's not safe to
yeah.
shine that way, so we're gonna stop it.
Even impatience that I remember, that teachers can have with their students and my own teachers had with me. I remember visceral moments where I was just in school and just not getting it, and a teacher getting really
Mm,
frustrated, and I could feel their frustration. Um,
mm,
and parts of me absolutely took on, you know, um, uh, all sorts of burdens throughout that process, right? I could tell
mm,
this adult figure who's standing over me and is twice my size is annoyed that I'm
mhm,
not getting this, right?
right,
Yeah,
right. And luckily, I'm making a big assumption here, but I'm sensing your vibe, and I'm guessing you're like a lot like me, where some people's parts will just transfer that to our children, and other people's parts are so against how I've been treated that they'll find the theory, the practice, the teaching, the books, so I'll never be that way to my children. And
that's
that's
right.
the approach I took as well. It's like I learned how to parent by not being parented, and I studied early childhood education even in my 20s. I remember saying that even if this job doesn't work out, at least I'll know how to be a dad. Like, because I don't have that example, and I didn't have, and I could say I've never actually been mothered either. So for me, learning these things, like how do you care for infants? How do you care for toddlers? Like that's my biggest passion for children is infants and
Mm,
toddlers. And now it's getting more and more clear as I do my own work. My deepest exiles and my are mostly infants and even in utero
yep,
parts that didn't get the kind of love and holding. So my whole base of trust, which happens between birth and say 1 and 2, wasn't formed. So I've had to go back to those parts and really help them attach to me so that I could actually step forward into the world with a lot more stability and trust.
that's right, right. I wanna shift a little bit, into talking about your book and talking about
Mhm,
self. Um, I was with the client this morning and, you know, she was having a very difficult time accessing self energy. This client has
mhm,
a a significant trauma history, and so, I had her kind of turn toward a part, or I just as an exercise, I had her imagine going toward a kid who's on the playground and is hurt and scared and is away from the other kids and how she would approach that kid, right? And at first, she was really doubtful that she could know what to do. She said, "Well, I don't have
mhm,
kids and I haven't interacted with kids recently, and
mhm.
I'm just not sure," right? And
Okay.
we worked with it a little more, and sure enough, she knew exactly what to do, right? Well, I guess I would get down on his level, and then I would approach him, and here's what I would say, and I think I would just offer a
Mhm,
hug, right? And
mhm,
offer this reassurance. It's like, "Oh, well, it seems like you know exactly what to do," right?
mhm,
And so that was our first time really kind of talking about self
mhm,
through her tapping into it, right? And even around these, kind of blocking beliefs around, "I don't know how to do that, I'm not a parent," and yet
mhm,
all of us have these innate qualities in us.
mhm,
Can you maybe tell us about your own kind of working definition of self? And with all that is floating around out there, how do you personally think
mhm,
of it? What's the definition that's helped you?
mm. Yeah. Um, I do. I think I've written a definition in my book, but I don't have one at the top of my head. But I would say, just riffing here. I think self, for one, is our I believe is our natural qualities, as I've said. Um, I do believe in the fact that the C's of self energy, like being curious and compassionate, creative, all those things, and the P's, being patient, persistent, is definitely great definitions of it. Um, but I would say there's, for me, on the deeper level, it is like that self is part of the essence, which I believe is something larger than us, which is like we could call it the larger self. If somebody believes in God, I think it's connected there. If it's the universe, if it's nature, and I do believe that inherent in that is like almost like people say in the guide realm, that it's like love. Like it does, nothing else really exists there. I mean, it is pure love and up in that space. And I feel like self is somehow connected to that and like an embodiment of that energy. And I almost like to think of it as water. Like there's water in my body, there's water in your body, it's the same water. And then there's water in the oceans, the same water, the water in the rivers. I mean, it has other things in it, like salt to make it an ocean. But I think we're tapping into like the connectedness of all of us. And then because I'm me, once I embody that energy, I have a uniqueness of how I express self, which is probably through my parts that are unburdened. Like we have this unburdened system that allows me to talk and think and speak and feel. And um but like you said with your client, like when you helped her tap into that open-hearted space, there's like knowledge and knowing how to be love. And I think
Yep.
that's what self is. And sometimes for me, it's like really simple. Like once I help a client touch that feeling of being in self the first time, I like, let's make that an anchor. Because at least if you can't get back there, you know you're not there. So if I'm irritable with my kids, if I'm irritable with my partner or irritable with somebody at work, at least I can say to myself, well, okay, this I just know I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll
Yeah.
pause and not
Yeah.
speak. Whereas, and then when I can ask my parts to separate, and I think that's what somehow what you did with your client there, there was enough unblending, like when you said it was a belief, like a
Right.
blocking belief, but it's a part, right, that says, I don't know how to take care of
Yep.
children. So as
Yep.
that part steps back, there's a natural like, oh, it's in my nature to love. And that's
Yep.
self.
Anchor is a great word for it. What I told her was something pretty similar around take a snapshot of this
Mm-hmm.
feeling right now, this state
Perfect.
that you're in, right?
Yeah.
I also like to use the body a lot too. So notice what
Mm-hmm.
happens in your body right
How it
now
feels.
as you're
Exactly.
holding
Because
that
there's like a
little boy in the
feeling of
playground.
spaciousness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that uh, works for me personally with all of this in my own work is the somatic piece. And for me, the
Mm-hmm.
first check-in is just go right to the belly, right? Like even right now, my belly is like pretty open, maybe not like 100% open, but like
Mm-hmm.
80% open. I've also got parts that, have a part that wants this interview to go well or to like,
Mm-hmm.
for you to enjoy the time or to
Mm-hmm.
not think it's a waste of
Yeah.
your time. So there's
No,
that,
I'm
and
feeling it.
there's self at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that for me, it's more of a heart check where it's like I like to almost, for me, I notice I'm often not as concentration of self when I'm operating above the shoulders. So even here, I could get through this whole interview above my shoulders and say all the right words. And I notice at certain times, even when you asked about self, I was a little bit in my head, and then all of a sudden, my attention was dropping more into my heart. And when I was in my heart space, then I felt like I'm like being told what self is as I'm speaking, like I'm sensing it almost as opposed to
Yeah.
thinking about it. And then
Yeah.
I do feel like my gut also can like almost, it's like almost like this, I almost sense my belly button wants to connect with people. but then in my belly I can feel like where I hold parts where there's pain or there's scared parts. And so it's
Yeah.
really interesting how everybody's body expresses it differently.
I have to tell you, a little background about how I got here was, before I came to IFS, I would say I was a very kind of practical therapist, and my wife, even some of the, I had a therapist who used to work for me, would give me a hard time about not being very woo woo,
Hmm.
and um, you know, so doing very practical types of therapy like CBT, like helping clients find a solution to their issues, right? Which yeah, I'm just in a very different place now. I pretty much burned out entirely from being a therapist and having to be this guy who had solutions and ideas and could teach you, how to unscramble your thinking. And I just burned out entirely
Mm,
and hit a wall a few years ago. It was only because of IFS and through IFS that I came back to it and went, oh my God, I don't have to be this guy with all of the answers anymore.
mm,
And this profound relief and this profound shift and this
mm,
sense of, yes, I have to know IFS and know the model and the steps and
mm.
the 6 F's, right? And the
Right.
unburdening sequence. But really, my main responsibility is accessing self, right, in the session. And you had said something on another episode about how sometimes things will just kind of come to you or kind of like down and
Hmm.
out. Um,
Hmm.
since I've been doing this work, that has been happening to me more often, where something is
Mm.
just literally coming to me and I'm saying it either out loud then or just, you know,
Right.
when I get a chance with a client. And that's been
Mm.
transformative for me. So to me, that's another
Yes.
indicator for me that I'm, yeah, and doing good work in that moment.
Hmm. I feel that too. And I've heard Dick Short say many times, as we unburden, we have more access. And I think it's not just access to self, but it's also access to that wisdom, to guides. And I find, like, just recently, I did some really deep work. I was PAing a level one, and there's an exercise where the participants unburden the PA. And whenever I do that, I seem to have like this intense healing, like bigger than almost any other venue. And I'm like, not only am I hearing things, but I'm like even starting to see people's guides now. And
Mhm.
so I think the burdens block us from what I think is, I say this in my spirituality chapter, like I think it's natural for us to see each other's guides, to be with our guides, to sense what somebody else may need in a moment and be curious about it and check with them and all that. And it seems like it's abnormal or supernatural. I think it's the burdens that block us and the rules that we create that our protectors carry, or the legacy that says this isn't natural. When I think it truly is natural, and the people who tap into it are just actually at a higher level of just being human.
Before I came to IFS, I would think that this is a little too out there, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't anymore, and that's the kind of part of my
Mm.
journey of experiencing it for myself and then with clients. Um, and I guess how to make it practical and tangible for them, right, was something I had to do for myself of like, how do
Right.
I might make IFS not too out there, if to replace that term.
Hmm.
And to your point, like accessing self is one way to do it, then that starts to feel more and more tangible when I know what that looks and feels like for myself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think, um, when we, at least when I'm working with clients and they touch that place, it's almost like unmistakably good. Like people
Mm,
can sense, like, wow, that how because oftentimes I'm sure you would say the same, like, how you feeling now? Like, how you doing?
right.
It's like I just feel so calm. I feel light. I feel spacious. I just feel wonderful. And I think that maybe the times that could go differently is if, I know you said you work with people with a lot of trauma, and
Mhm.
I've heard sometimes self energy doesn't feel safe to certain people because they've been hurt when they express their light and shine their light.
Mm,
So that might be the one exception to when self energy doesn't feel safe. But I think most of the time, it's almost like, isn't this like how you want to be? Like, can you feel it? You feel it, right? And you're like,
Yeah, yeah,
yes, I do feel
yeah.
that, and I want
Don't
more
you
of
wanna feel
this.
more of this? Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I tell people, like my book is called Self Led, right? So it's like, it's not that you're in self all the time. It means, I think my goal for people would be that you're self led in these areas of your life as much as possible. Like the more
Yep.
the better. And then we're kind of patient with ourselves when we're not, and we do repairs when we're not, whether that's, with parenting or at work or in relationships or spirituality, with our connection with another being. Um, so it's definitely good for any listeners to hear that it's not that self is good, parts are bad. And I know you know that already. But it's good to just I have to keep reminding myself of that too, that um, how to be patient with ourselves when we are blended. And
Mm.
my preferred method of unblending to get to self is simply to do what I call exquisite attunement, where we kind of ask the part, can you give me just enough space for me to be here too? Because a lot of times the wording is like, can you leave? Can you step back? Can you go into
Yeah,
another room? And for me, it's like, can you give me enough space so I'm here too? And the first thing I do is look at the part or sense the part and say, this is what I'm feeling from you. Tell me more. Or the minute I can acknowledge to the part, like, not just that I get it, but how I get
mm,
it. Like, this is what I can sense. Like there's a part of me that was scared, like, oh, if I brought up that thing that I said earlier, is that going to ruin the whole interview, right? And like,
yeah,
I could say that part, hey, we're doing that just to help the world, and it'll be okay. And now that part can step back a little bit. So,
yeah,
like, the love we want to offer the world is the love we can offer our parts. And I think the more we take time to pause and say to our parts, hey, this is what I'm hearing. Do I have it right? Help me understand it if I don't.
yeah, yeah,
And am I representing you well? Then it builds trust in the system. So then when Seth walks into the room, they all go, hey, it's Seth. We're cool. Let's step back. Like, I don't even have
yeah,
to, a lot of times I don't have to ask my parts anymore to step back. Like, if I'm
right.
walking into a space where I need self energy,
Yeah,
just my presence for the parts that I've worked with, they go, oh, he's cool. We'll trust him. But it
yeah,
took example after example and consistency of being with them in a certain loving way that there's like, now there's trust.
yeah. In a way, I'm wanting to loop it back around to where we started with child development, because again, I'm just in this world of how to parent a
Mm,
4-year-old,
of
and
course.
part of
We
that
can.
means big feelings all the time, and
Uh-huh.
drama and conflict and anger and maybe throwing things. Um, so I think the traditional way, not traditional, the way I was parented at times with big feelings was, go to your room until you don't have big feelings anymore,
Mm,
right? So I'm a little kid and I'm angry and I don't know what to do and I just threw something, right? Go to your room
mm, mhm,
and deal with this painful feeling that you don't even know what it is,
mhm,
and
mm,
and then you can come back to
yeah,
me. A lot of what me and my parent friends are kind of all about these days in this gentle parenting idea is, paradoxically, when you just track what your kid is feeling, validate that, reflect that back to them, right? Normalize it. They're
mhm,
able to let it go or work through the anger, right? More quickly and
mhm,
smoothly and with less,
mhm,
you know, burdens
yeah,
than
right,
this kind of, hey, well, you shouldn't be so angry, and these toys are for everyone, right? Why are you so
mhm,
angry, right? You should just
mm,
share. Um,
right,
so yeah.
yes. This makes so much sense. And what I heard, you know, what you said about how you were treated, it's almost like if you boil it down, anger is bad, or big feelings are
100%.
bad. And I actually had parts that thought anger was bad, because the only time I saw anger was like people yelling at each other and kind of hurting each other or not safe. and nobody sat with me and processed it with me. And what turned it around for me, well, let me say this: with children, developmentally appropriately, I could say, "Oh, I see you're really angry right now." But
Yeah.
there was a part of me saying that because I wanted you to stop being angry. It wasn't like I was really holding space. So that was really like a self-like part.
Mm.
And it wasn't until myself started realizing that anger is really, and I didn't put this in the book. I did say that anger is like a truth seer. And now I want to say anger is truth on fire. So when our
Mm.
kids are angry, when we're angry, it's because they see something that they don't like, something that's happening that's unjust, something that's happening that hurt their feelings. And this is a truth for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could say, wow, what I'm seeing is that you're really angry, and I can tell something upset you, and there's something that bothered you. Do you want to tell me what hurt you or what's making you angry? And
Yeah.
then when we reflect that back, we're like, I see your truth. Yeah, that makes sense. You're angry. I would be angry about that too. And then, because like if I notice with me, if I get angry, I only get louder if someone's not listening.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you keep yelling back at me and you're not hearing my point, I will yell louder. But if you say, "Oh, you're trying to tell me that when I said that it hurt you," now I could go down because I don't have to like turn up my fire even more to get you to understand my truth.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think what you're saying is exactly right, that we're treating our kids the way we want to treat our parts and vice versa. Like
Yep.
acknowledging is everything. Um, I was listening to a Thomas Hubel podcast the other day. He was on a podcast, uh, and would it help to name the podcast or not?
Sure. Go for it. Yeah.
It's "What Drives You" by Kevin Miller,
Mm.
and at 10 minutes in, he describes attunement, healthy attunement with children and parents. Is that the child would say this if they felt attunement: "I feel you, and I feel how you feel me." And that just like I had to pause it and listen to it like 10 times because it's a
Yeah.
little
Nailed it.
wordy. It's like a little bit tricky, like a puzzle, but it's like I feel like if you're attuned to me, I feel you, and I feel how you feel me. And I think it's that. Like
Yeah.
when our children say, "You feel me being angry," and you're getting it,
Yep. Yep.
that's a soothing force of connection that allows me to be safe. And there's zero shaming by saying
Yes.
like, you know what, if you could calm down, and I understand you're angry, but if you could lower your voice, I could hear you. It's all micro shaming. Like it's saying, as you are
Yeah.
isn't lovable. You need to change to be lovable. And now you're lovable. Now that you're calm. And if we say like, hey, I totally get why you're angry. I would be angry too. Do you need more time to be angry? Because I could
Yep.
sit here while you be angry, and I can just sit here with you while you're
Yep.
angry. I'm not, because if I leave until you come back, or like in your case, exile you until you're done, it means you're not lovable.
Yep.
But come back when you're lovable.
Yeah. I'm just noticing I have parts reacting to that, and parts wishing that we had more of that
Yeah.
resonance during
Right.
moments where it mattered most, and
Right.
instead, um, my own relationship with anger was such that it seemed like a really ugly thing that I should get rid of
Mm,
now at a very early
mhm,
age, and it didn't come back, at least
mm,
externally, until I was in grad school. And I remember I got into a fight on the phone with the girl I was dating at the time, and I just like was in my apartment alone and felt completely um, enraged and abandoned and scared, and punched a hole in the drywall. And then I
mm,
was appalled, right? I was like, what kind of monster am
mm,
I that
mm.
I just did that, right? That I have that level of anger inside of me. So that
Wow.
unlocked a whole new chapter of my own growth
Mm,
and dealing with anger and what is this,
wow.
right? And I'm sure that I think that led me back to therapy at that time in a different way. Um, and it's evolved so much since then, but for decades, literally, it was just
Mm,
off the table for me as an emotion.
wow. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want, if parents are listening, I want to add one more piece. If sometimes children do need a little space to, depending on the child. So sometimes I could ask a question and say, I see you're really angry. It makes sense you're angry. You didn't get what you want. Like, it's okay for you to be angry. And do you want to be angry here? Or do you need some space, like in your room, to just be
Mhm.
alone and gather yourself, or take time? Like, what do you need? Do you want me to come with you? So then if the child wants to be in their room, it's more of a choice.
Yeah.
And I might even add, like, and please know, if you do make that choice, come back as soon as you want to. Like, we're right
Yeah.
here. Like, if you don't want me to be with you, like, we want the message to be like, I love you no matter what you choose here. And Alfie Kahn does a great
Yeah.
job of that in his book, Unconditional
Mm.
Parenting,
Mhm.
around
Yeah, that
like,
invitation to come back is huge, right?
mhm,
Come back at any time when you're
right,
ready, even if you still have the anger, right?
right. And that's why I think timeouts are really damaging, because we're basically saying, not
Totally.
only are you exiled, but even if you get to be socially appropriate and there's 2 more minutes left, you're still exiled.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait,
Yeah.
they're ready to come back. Why not just
Yeah.
let them? And so that means, for what happens in those next 2 minutes, if it was me, it would be like I would start thinking about how lame my parents are for keeping me in this situation. Then I went
Yeah.
from realizing my own stuff to like being angry that I'm being exiled.
Yeah.
So
It was
it's
like
not
like
helpful.
forcing kids to apologize, right?
Yeah.
Was kinda something of my era when I was being brought up and is,
Right.
something we're doing differently now and something that's
Mhm.
even schools do differently, right?
Right.
They might work with that moment to try to teach empathy or promote empathy
Mhm.
of, right, can you look
Right.
at Billy and see,
Right.
that he's hurt now or see how that affected him,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
versus say you're sorry.
That's right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the kid's not ready yet, right?
Right.
Like you said, there's an exile part
Yeah.
happening and then but they might say it to get out of that moment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So right.
Um,
Yeah.
we have, seem to have covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and,
Mm.
um, I wanted to ask you so much more about your book and all this, but in a way, maybe I did, and
It's
maybe
all
people
coming
are
through.
yeah, it's all coming through, exactly, but,
Yeah.
what else do you want people to know, at least for today? And then in light
Mhm.
of your book, what should they know about it, and also about the work that you do or any
Yeah.
offerings you have right now that people should know about?
Mm. Well, I would say, if you like what we're talking about so far in this kind of gestalt of this, how to be with your parts and how to be with people, I would say that the book dives into it with specific examples of how do you do this while we're parenting. How do I do this at work, whether I'm a leader or I'm part of a staff?
Mm,
How to be with your parts in meetings? How do you speak for your parts? How does being in self lead to innovation and creativity? How do you support that as a leader? Um, in the form of relationships, the relationship chapter is really around, like, how do I really get to know my parts that are activated with my partner, and how do I speak for them and even have these courageous conversations about our parts, which really helps the listener soften. I mean, think of how many fights that partners have where it's all about, like, I'm just trying to get you to understand me. I'm just trying to get you to understand me, but we're in such different places that it's just smashing into each other. And IFS
yeah.
gives a beautiful model for communicating around our parts and what we're feeling. And it's not like we have to just swallow it. We could actually release it through sharing our story about our parts.
Mm,
And I would say the spirituality chapter is really like, who's praying, who's engaging in the spiritual practice. Like, what does it mean to be connected to something larger than us? Um, I talk a little bit more about what is self, What is self
Mm-hmm.
energy? But I would say if I boiled my book down to the core of it, it's really that, you know, parts beget parts. And we know this from all the IFS teachings, which means if I want to have a smoother life in all these areas, the more I can be with my parts and hear them and get their trust to allow me to lead, or my highest unburdened parts, then my life goes smoother in all these different areas. And my parts get what they want. So my parts want my kids to behave so I could rest and I could be seen as a good father. And when they lead, it somehow doesn't work. And when I lead, I can look back to my parts and go, how am I doing? It's like your goals are being met too, right? Like they're in that space you were hoping for. Like they have reasons that I don't. They want it for me.
Yeah.
Myself wants to be there for them, for my kids. And the same with if I was a CEO or if I was a team leader. Do I want my team to succeed because I look good? And why does that always rub people the wrong way? Even if I'm saying the right things.
Mm.
But if I'm like, I really want to succeed because I want my team to thrive and I want us to serve this purpose or meet our mission and vision, all of a sudden the same words come off with a different feeling and it actually works. And then we can look to our parts and go, whew, we're safe because our team is succeeding, right? Okay, good.
Mm.
You know, so there's parts beget parts. And there was another key thing, but I guess in general, it's just like, how do we be in the space where we're self-led as much as possible?
Yeah.
And like for people between sessions, so if you're seeing a therapist or a practitioner, IFS is not just doing this work in these little moments. It's like I get to know these parts in my therapy sessions. And then between sessions, I'm really noticing when they're blending with me, when I have other parts coming in. I'm continuing this relationship with what I consider a sacred being, that our parts are sacred beings. And really that's the book is about, having a relationship with your parts that way. And knowing that if I have an angry part or a dismissive part or part that dissociates me, that's not who they are. That's what they're doing. It's a behavior. My part is
Yeah.
being critical. I don't have a critic.
Mm.
When I help this part with what it needs and I give it the attention it needs, it changes its behavior. It's not criticizing anymore.
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
even call a part a critic is almost like boxing it in. So I'd like to,
Mm-hmm.
this deep respect for our parts, and knowing that they're
Mm.
like parts have self, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was, pick any age, if I was 5, if I was 10, if I was 11, I was a person with a self and with parts. And if I get
Yeah.
stuck in time and I go back to that part has self and parts.
Yep.
So we trust the self in the part as well.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's what really being a hope merchant is all about, is
Mm.
believing in people, believing in our parts, not just wanting them to change.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Seth, I can't thank you enough. And for folks interested in the book, I'll be sure to have links in the description and everything. And then if people want to reach out, SethKopald.com, and on Instagram at self-led by Seth. And Seth, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back
Yeah.
sometime. There's clearly many directions we could go with this. I almost was too excited to hear your thoughts on different areas, but
Yeah.
thank you again. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And it's okay to add one last thing. You asked about
Please.
offerings. I do
Yes,
see
please.
clients. I'm actually thinking of broadening out more to doing workshops and like retreats. So at some point, just keep checking my website. I might start adding places where we could meet and we could talk and we could do retreats. And so I have a couple lined up that are mostly for specific groups, but I'm looking to open more and more for the public. So if you just go ahead and follow those sites,
Great.
we'll hopefully
Excellent.
link up in the
Exciting
future.
stuff. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again, Seth. And keep
Thank
in
you so
touch.
much for having me. And I really loved hearing all the things you said as well. And I'm noticing even our glasses match. So I think
Yeah, I know, right?
I think we're a good
Glasses
team
and
here.
drummers. Yeah, exactly.
Drummers,
I would say so.
glasses, beard, and sensitive, like loving guys.
Yeah,
Here, just having a
yeah,
conversation. So love
yeah,
it.
exactly. Thanks again, Seth.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.